AI is not only transforming business in Louisiana, it's reshaping how our public policies are created and how we educate future generations. Our current panel will explore the role of AI in governance, regulation, and preparing tomorrow's workforce. Moderating the discussion is Dr. Roy Heidelberg, Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of Public Administration in the Ourso College. And please welcome Dr. Heidelberg and our panelists, Dr. Keena Arbuthnot, Dr. Erin Bendily, Dr. Tristan Denley, and Dr. Mostafa Elseifi.
All right, great. So thank you, Jared. My name is Roy Heidelberg. As Jared mentioned, I'm the chair in the Department of Public Administration here at LSU in the Ourso College of Business. And I'm very happy to be here for this panel. Just like the last panel, I think we're going to start off. I'm just going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll go into some questions.
Sure. My name is Mostafa Elseifi. I'm a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Louisiana State University. I got my graduate degree from Virginia Tech, and I joined LSU in 2007. My interaction with AI is mostly through research. So we used AI a lot in transportation engineering for identification of cracking on the road, for prediction of pavement service life, so many applications. And then 2 and 3 years ago, Keena recruited me as part of the AI fellow program, and now we are using AI for prediction of student success, as we are going to talk about today.
Good morning, my name is Erin Bendily. I work for the Pelican Institute for Public Policy, which is a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank. My background is K-12 education. I briefly served as Governor Jindal's education advisor, spent 10 years leading policy and governmental affairs at the State Department of Education, and now have the privilege of working on a number of different public policy issues, including tech. We concentrate our efforts on talking to the general public, educating them about complex policy issues that matter to them in their everyday lives, and also communicating with public policy makers about their role in a number of the issues that they encounter every day as they respond to their constituents, and attempt to do their job in moving our economy along and helping Louisiana to thrive. A lot of times those two communications are not all that different, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but as we talk to the general public about what AI is and some of the hot issues surrounding it, and we talk to lawmakers about the same, we may have a few lawmakers that work day-to-day in tech issues, but by and large, most of them are not in this space. So there's a lot of education that occurs, and we serve as a resource to them and try to do our part to make sure that while there are roles for the state to step in a regulatory space, that we're also sensitive to the needs to sometimes take a step back. Responsive government is not always the best knee-jerk reaction to things that are evolving as quickly as this and have such a large role to play in our economy. So I look forward to speaking with you in this panel more about that today.
Yes, so I'm Tristan Denley. I'm Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs and Innovation at the Louisiana Board of Regents. So I work with all of the state's public 28 universities and colleges, and really anything to do with students and programs and education. Part of that work is really leading the state's master plan to reach our state attainment goal that by 2030, we aim for 60% of our adult population to have a credential of value past high school. Currently, we're right at around 51%, so there's work to be done, but trying to, on a lot of different fronts, mobilize and organize and strategize the work that we do in higher education to try to meet that attainment goal. That's kind of my, the main focus of the work that I do. From an AI perspective, so I'm a mathematician by trade, and so have a background in data analysis and using technology in those ways. When I was provost back at Austin Peay State University now, about a decade ago, I built I guess the easiest way to think of this is like Google and Amazon and Netflix meets academic advising. I think many of us have had the experience of working with students and trying to guide them through what majors are you choosing, where does that lead, what courses should you take next, what sequence should you take them in, all of those kinds of things. I think the easiest takeaway of that is it's really easy to do that in your own field. It's really easy in your own field to know, well, these are the courses you should take. I'm a mathematician. These are the math courses you should take now. These are the sequence of math courses. It's much harder to try to give really good advice when one of those you're trying to give advice in is not very close to the field you are. So what humanities should you be taking? What social science should you be taking? How do those things connect with what it is? And so this early suggestion engine was an attempt to try to use technology to create an interaction for students and advisors to be able to use technology in that way. You can imagine that was a decade ago. Lots of things to talk about on the panel since then, but that's at least a beginning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Keena Arbuthnot. Started here at LSU in 2007 as a faculty member and a professor, currently a professor in education. I wear 2 administrative hats here. I'm the Vice President of Data and Strategic Analytics and Chief Data Officer, as well as the Dean of the Graduate School. In both of those roles, I see where AI can be helpful in terms of how we work with and address student needs, as well as helping them navigate through the kind of process or pathway from entrance to graduation and beyond in their careers. And on the data and strategic analytics side, my office was opened June 2023 with the idea of making sure that LSU harnesses their data in a way that can help improve decision-making, both at the cabinet level and beyond throughout the university. So for the last 2 years, we've been building out the infrastructure to do so, helping to build a data culture here at the university. But one of the initiatives that goes along with this is early on, President Tate, I had a conversation with President Tate in terms of how AI would be integrated in this new office. And we came up with the AI Faculty Fellows Program, which is basically taking the expertise of our faculty, bringing it together as a group. And I'm proud to say that we had 9 AI Faculty Fellows that started with my team going on 2 years. And they're working on lots of different contexts and lots of different problems that we face here at the university. One in particular is student success, which is kind of a common thread with this panel. And Dr. Elseifi is one of those AI faculty fellows, and he'll tell you more about some of the work that they're doing. But we're also having our other teams are working on things related to the environment and the buildings that we have here on campus and better understanding air quality, in addition to helping our students through their initial mathematics courses. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer.
Great, well, thank you all. Keena, we're going to start with you, if you don't mind, because you've already started discussing this part. Really, it's interesting because we've had data-informed decision-making, evidence-based decision-making, data analytics, big data. These have been terms that go back, more than a decade. And so, there's that part of what we do within the institutions. And I'm interested that AI is different than just simply data analytics or data-based decision-making. There's something special about it that gives it some break with what we've done in the past. And could you talk a little bit about how AI is changing perhaps within the institution, how we govern or operate within these large institutions like the university?
Yes, I think to your point, absolutely. It's bigger than just how we use it for data-informed decision-making. I think from a teaching and learning perspective, as a professor, I think it has huge implications in terms of the way in which our students learn, in terms of the way in which we teach as faculty members and approach our teaching. And I think it's going to have a profound effect potentially on higher education in multiple ways. We're seeing it now in the last several years, and I think just with the onset of a lot of these tools that everyone is using, from children to adults, how it's going to have a huge change on higher education. In terms of data-informed decision-making and even in terms of the AI faculty fellows, the idea was saying, how can we leverage this space, this AI, and the expertise that we have on campus? I'll say people like Socratic Mukhopadhyay, most of you all know some of the work he does, and in terms of Michael Berlinski, some of our AI experts here on campus who work in CCT, really trying to ask them, how can you leverage your expertise to help us better inform decisions? But I think the common thread, and we talked about this as we were preparing for this, is student success. And with my background in education, and I'm a former K-12 math teacher, I think the biggest place where there's so much opportunity is how do we help students from pre-K to K-12 all the way through higher ed become more successful? And this common thread is basically saying, and how do we leverage AI in any way possible along that trajectory, and I'm sure everybody on the panel will talk about that, to help us do that. So in terms of me thinking about data-informed decision-making, the real lane and the pathway, which I think is the common thread for all of us as educators, is how can we help students become more successful, as well as in terms of what they'll do post-graduation and beyond.
Thanks, Keena. Yeah, and let's keep that idea going about student success and talk to you a little bit, Tristan, and how the Board of Regents thinks about student success, and especially in the context of what AI is now doing. We just heard from the last panel about the extraordinary opportunities that AI presents. And it's very true that there's going to be this remarkable increase in, for example, productivity. And one of the panelists mentioned how important it is for us to prepare students for AI and how much it's going to change the workforce. And just to give you an example, Goldman Sachs had a study recently, and they said that AI could replace 300 million jobs across the globe. It would replace a quarter of the tasks that people currently do. Over 60% of jobs are exposed to AI. A quarter of the jobs performed today will be performed entirely by AI in the near future. And this is a situation in which 14%, according to McKinsey, of employees globally could need to change careers. That has a huge downstream effect on what we think we're doing within higher ed in terms of preparing the so-called future workforce. And you mentioned, Tristan, that the Board of Regents has this goal of 60% of people having I forget the word you used, but basically a credential, a high-quality credential. Well, does this change the way we even think about what a high-quality credential is?
Yeah, lots to unpack there. So I think the answer is that, first of all, as we're thinking about this 60% number, maybe it's worth taking 2 or 3 seconds to think about where that might even come from. Last year, I did a little bit of digging around. I looked at Lightcast, which is a labor market data analysis tool, some of you may have known, and looked to see last year in Louisiana, the jobs that were advertised here, what proportion of those jobs asked for a bachelor's degree or an associate degree or a credential, some kind of certification or an industry-based certification or a master's degree. And then categorize those jobs in that way. So just broad scale, just say, okay, so of all of the jobs that are advertised, what proportion of those jobs only asked for something like a high school diploma? What proportion of jobs asked for certifications, associates, masters? You get the idea. It's already the case last year that 68% of the jobs that were advertised here in Louisiana asked for a credential that was more than a high school diploma. So the sense that in 2030, 60% of our jobs will need something more than high school, the future is already here. The reality is that the new jobs are not all the jobs, so maybe 60% is the right sort of proportion, but the reality is that this is not something that's just being sort of dreamt up in a policy room somewhere. Real employers sitting in these rooms, sitting across Louisiana, are already asking for credentials that are higher than a high school diploma. Well, I think your point is they'll say, well, okay, so that credential that's more than a high school diploma, what do we know about what that is, and how can we make sure that as we make our way towards that future, that we get to a place where the credentials that people have and the learning that goes into it actually meshes with the needs that they have. What I'm happy to, well, I guess more than that 60%, 68% mismatch, it is in fact the case right now in Louisiana that we are short at every level. So it is the case that we need more people who have industry-based certifications and short-term workforce credentials, but we need more people with associate's degrees, technical diplomas, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctoral degrees, all the way across the educational spectrum. So as we're thinking about this issue, we need to recognize that we need a full-scale approach to reach this solution. It is not just about community colleges, it's not just about universities, it's not about any particular universities, it's about all of us together being able to produce that educated workforce that we need. And then the further question then at the next level down is, well, what in fact is the skill and knowledge set that people are going to need to have? I think the reality is the kinds of things that people are talking about today are in many ways quite similar to the kinds of conversations that people had 20, 30 years ago when there was a similar technology revolution, 100 years before that. It has always been the case that as new technology has come along, people have said, well, these technologies will replace people's jobs. I think what we all recognize is they don't so much replace people's jobs as change the jobs that they do. Make sense? Whenever you hear somebody say, AI is going to take your job, no, actually somebody who understands how to use AI is going to take your job. That's what's going to go. And so ways in which we really can, I know there's a lot of faculty in the room, ways in which we really can help people to understand how to use, and really we're talking about generative AI today, right? I mean, the reality is we can talk about cosine engines and predictive analytics and all of the kinds of technology that have existed for 50 years, but the reality is there is a new kind of technology that is now available, and it's ubiquitous, right? We all have it on our phones, we all have access to it all the time, and so how now, not just in quantitative fields, not just in engineers and physicists and mathematicians or statisticians, but everyone, all kinds of disciplines, what are ways in which we now, in a meaningful way, can help people to understand what they can do and what can be done with these new kinds of technologies. That, I think, is a significant challenge because it is moving incredibly quickly. I think 2 years ago, when ChatGPT was first announced, if I'd sat you down then and said, okay, 2 years from now, where do you think we would be? I think you probably wouldn't think that we were where we are right now. Because the pace of the development of these tools is so fast. And so there's no reason to sugarcoat it. The reality is we know that this is moving much more quickly than we might have anticipated. It's very difficult to anticipate that, but we can't just sort of wait and go, well, let's see how it turns out. Instead, we have to jump in and have to engage with this across all disciplines to realize where we will be in 2025 and 2030.
Thanks, Tristan. So, Mostafa, can you talk a little bit about your use of AI and how, as a fellow here at LSU, you're using it for supporting students and for predicting student success?
Sure. So we started with the problems that we have, and it's a nationwide problem. Is that we have many students start their college education, but they don't graduate. And if you look at the number, it's quite significant. So, for example, at LSU, we are actually above the national average. We have 69% of the students finish their degree after 6 years. And the national average is about 60%. So there is quite a high number of students that 31% of the students that they start their degree and then they don't get a degree at the end. And this has many implications. Is that it obviously if they take student loans, that it affects their finance probably for the rest of their lives. The mental impact is quite significant, and the reason that they wanted a degree in the first place is to get a higher salary, and they will not get that. So the issue is quite important. And another issue that we started to recognize at the beginning of our study is that some students, they don't know which major to pick. And if you look at the survey, 60% of the graduates actually have remorse about the degree that they finish, which is quite unfortunate. So they have a degree that they actually don't want. So this is also an issue that is quite significant. Like we have almost 75% of the students, they switch major. And we want, so you can think, how does AI work into this? And we're actually very surprised by the level of support that we can get from AI to help solve this issue. So we got all the data for the students that start their degree, so their data in high school, all type of data, 300, maybe 325 variables. And some of the variables are not very helpful, but some of them are quite significant. So we have their high school, whether they have financial support from their parents, are they athlete or not. So all type of information about over the past 12 years. So we collected, if I remember, 94,000 records. And obviously for us, these are just numbers. Like we don't know which student is which, they are just numbers for us. And we started playing with AI, and we wanted to predict whether a student will complete his degree or her degree at the end of the first year. So we have only 1 year, and we want to predict whether this student is at risk or not. And if we can identify it very early, we can provide additional support to this student, so the student will be able to graduate at the end. So very early in their college education, at the end of the first year, we wanted to predict whether this student can graduate or not, or will graduate or not. So we tried many different AI tools, and we use artificial neural network, we use random forest, and the best performer by far was XGBoost. And XGBoost, give you a little bit of history, it's actually not very old, so they say AI has been around for 50 years, but XGBoost just started in 2015, and we start actually using it maybe 2 or 3 years later. So it's actually a very useful tool for us, and the accuracy that we were able to achieve was over 90%. So we are able to predict whether a student would graduate by the end of the first year. And we went one step beyond this, is that obviously many of the users, the student counselor, the chairs, the undergraduate coordinators, they cannot use Python, they cannot use coding. So we transferred this into a web-based tool, very user-friendly, very simple. And basically, we went to a level that the student counselor will enter the student information, and then the AI tool will tell the student counselor or the user whether this student should be getting more attention or this student is likely to graduate. So that's the first usage. The second usage that we did, and we are able to predict whether a measure is the right measure for the student or not. So we also look at the data set, and we are able to identify whether this student should pursue this measure or not. So obviously these questions, and us as professor, from an ethical point of view, we don't want this tool to be near a student because it would confuse them significantly. So we make sure that these type of tools will be only accessible to a student counselor or to someone who can use this information to provide additional support for the student at a very early stage of their college education. The third application that we developed is to help the student identify the top 10 employer for their particular degree. So we looked at historical data for graduate, for example, of petroleum engineering. What are the top 10 companies that hire a petroleum engineer graduate at LSU? And what is the salary that they get? And also, what are the available openings? So that's, again, this particular tool is geared towards the user, which is the student. So this is a summary of what we did. Obviously, I can provide you more details, but I want to give the other panelists a chance to.
Thank you, Mostafa. So, Erin, as you mentioned in your introduction, you have a lot of experience in K-12 education, so you have some insight in sort of the pipeline that's leading into higher ed and some of the challenges that these other panelists face. Could you talk a little bit about that? I mean, one of the areas that people tout and really see a lot of promise in with generative AI in particular is the idea of personalized learning and how that's going to change largely the kind of the preparatory or K-12 space. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, we know that students are already arriving on college campuses having used AI for a while now. I chuckled a little bit when my co-panelists talked about playing with AI. Kids have been playing with AI for a long time now. And what does the research tell us about how kids learn best? A lot of time that's through play. And so the opportunity to partner an adult mentor and educator with them to add some intentionality and purpose to that playing, that's where we really have some opportunities to do amazing things for kids as they learn. And so, we have an obligation to make sure that that's happening way before students arrive on college campuses. It's already happening now, and we're playing catch up. We really are. And so there are lots of implications for what that means in terms of everyday student support, making sure that our teachers and the preparation programs that work with them are training them and keeping them current, ongoing professional development in AI, to incorporate that into the classroom in a number of ways, everyday learning, everyday instruction, but also leveraging AI for things like tutoring and academic intervention. We were really pleased to see the State Department of Education and BESI, the State Board of Education, convene an AI task force last year that met several times, and they went through a number of different issues, the ones that I just discussed, and certainly the ones that I think you tend to hear even more about, issues of cheating, or the PC term, academic integrity, the technological capabilities that our schools need to have, and what it takes to support that and keep it current. These are huge challenges. So we were pleased to see that they had a number of really productive conversations. They produced an 18-page guidance booklet that I would encourage all of you to go and read. It's on the State Department of Education's website. Lots of good stuff there, not just for educators and school leaders, but also for policymakers. Policymakers have an obligation to make sure, particularly in public schools, that they provide the support and the tools and the resources that are needed to make sure that we're not left behind, that our students aren't left behind, and ultimately that our state is not left behind, because student success is Louisiana's success. And if we do this right, we will see lives changed for the better, not just for those individual students, as they continue through post-secondary education and into the workforce. Things like career pathways, as we've already mentioned, but ultimately opportunities for our economy, and that will pay real dividends.
Excellent, thank you. So, Tristan, you mentioned something that I think is really important to underscore, which is that when we talk about AI, we're talking about generative AI in particular, and that this notion of artificial intelligence can be applied in so many different domains, and especially as we have already talked about in terms of data analytics. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so again, a lot to unpack there, I think. So first of all, from a regulatory standpoint, or from a Board of Regents standpoint, about a year ago, the Board of Regents created a subcommittee specifically focused on AI that my team staffs, exactly to try to begin to think through the kinds of questions and challenges that you put in place. The Board of Regents is the state's coordinating board in higher education. So with that coordinating board, there are 4 management boards: the LSU System Board, the University of Louisiana System, the Louisiana Community and Technical College System, and the Southern System. Those 4 systems deal with the day-to-day management of all of the universities and colleges in the state. We certainly have been having ongoing conversations with the leadership of those management boards and those universities to think through, are there in fact policy implications on campuses to think through. I'm sure that it's the case that here at LSU that they have been through the policy structure that you have to think through, well, okay, so are there in fact ways that we need to think through the wording of policies around academic integrity or policies around other pieces of the way that universities unfold. At least my experience with much of this is that even though this is a really new technology, lots of the policy questions involved are things that we've had with us for years and years and years. Guess what? Students used to cheat before generative AI came along. You know, I've been a math professor for 25 years. People copy. They do all kinds of, people are ingenious about the ways in which they go about cheating. And so policies already exist on university campuses, and procedures already exist on university campuses to deal with people who cheat. And so it may well be that we need to go and take a good hard look at that and make sure that we can think through how that we deal with that. But many of the questions that around integrity already exist. I think what's more challenging for us is to really now begin to think through how, in fact, should we think through how we understand this technology. I'll give an example. This is not at LSU, but this was another institution across the country. There was a young lady who she was supposed to write a term paper, some kind of essay or something like that. In the rubric that the faculty member had created, it said that she would have extra credit if she went to the writing center as part of the experience of writing that essay. Right? Not an uncommon thing. Well, she was writing the essay at 11:30 at night, and the writing center wasn't open. So she thought, I know, I'll use this generative AI thing. I will write a prompt, say, please give me the feedback that I would receive from a writing center about the essay that I wrote. That make sense? Well, so the faculty member heard about this, and she ended up getting a 0 on the essay because she cheated, in their estimation. She appealed and said, well, hang on. I was supposed to go to the writing center, but the writing center wasn't open. You can see what it is, how it is that I interacted with this artificial intelligence. I didn't ask it to give me new ideas. I didn't ask it to rewrite it. I asked it specifically, give me the feedback that I would get from the writing center. That make sense? And, well, in the end, they came to some compromise, and that's all well and good. But what it really raises is, you know what, and I know there's people from the writing center here in the room, this has been a long-standing issue in writing center culture, right? So if you're somebody in a writing center, there has always been this sort of understood line of what point are you writing the essay for them, and at what point are you giving feedback. This has been an ongoing kind of conversation in writing center culture for a long, long time. Not a new thing. The challenge for us now is to take, as we've been saying, a new actor, a new source for this kind of advice, and then understand how, as educators, are we able to incorporate that valuable advice, but in ways that probably don't really raise any new ethical questions. They just It is now the case that that kind of advice is much more available, right? The reality is we've all been trying to meet a deadline. We've all been trying to write some piece of work right there late at night, and very often the kinds of facilities that might be available at other times of the day, they're not available at 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, guess what? Now they are. And so it's really raising a sort of different setting rather than in lots of different ethical kinds of questions.
Interesting. That's a good point. You know, with that said, this raises some questions about the kind of work that you do, Mostafa and Keena, in the area of data, because you know we have to think about how we balance the value of democratized data, transparency, accountability, these things with the privacy concerns about data, especially in the context of students. It's rather important with respect to education in particular. For example, in order to make these types of predictions, you need to have excellent data, and you need to have agential level data for these types of predictions as well. So can you talk a little bit about that, about how we navigate that kind of regulatory space?
What I think to your point is you have to be careful and balance the two. And our teams talk about that, whether it's looking at environmental concerns or looking at student success or even teaching and learning data, which is to make sure that we're thoughtful about how we pull the data, where we pull the data, the accuracy of the data, as well as the anonymity behind the data in terms of making sure that we protect those individuals, whether it's students, whether it's faculty members, teachers, or et cetera. I'd like to circle back a little bit on what Dr. Denley was talking about just quickly in terms of, my fellow panelists were talking about professional development for teachers. In my former life, I was a K-12 high school mathematics teacher. And I see the incredible advantages of what we have available now through generative AI. And just from the teaching and learning perspective as a professor, as well as a K-12 teacher, I see that there are so many opportunities, but there's a lot of fear. And some of the fear is of the unknown and being able to make sure that it's a two-pronged approach, right? We've got students and we've got young kids that know much more about some of these tools than the actual professors that are teaching them or the teachers that are teaching them. And trying to find a way in which to come together and utilize and leverage both of those tools, to Dr. Denley's point, in terms of how do we use generative AI, Grammarly, some of the tools that are out there to help our students to learn and to perform better in terms of their writing, which is critical for any of our college students or our K-12 students. But I look at it from the mathematics perspective. One of our teams is working on teaching and learning. We call it the teaching and learning team. And we have gateway courses, which are mathematics gateway courses here, that have very high DFW rates, which means that we have lots of students that have difficulty getting through kind of these gateway courses. And these gateway courses lead to these technological fields. So I'm showing how this is all linked together. There's a thread that lead to getting these degrees in these advanced technological fields. And if you can't get through these gateway courses, so the question for our team was, how do we leverage the data that we have and leverage our AI to help us better understand and better help support these students? The problem is we've got large groups of students that need these gateway courses, but we have traditionally across even the country over 50% DFW rates, which means they can't get past these courses. And how do we leverage that and teach both our professors who are our teachers, quote unquote, and then help to address the learners' issues and make sure that they can leverage these new tools and ways in which that can help them perform better and get past these areas in order to get the types of degrees that will land them squarely in spaces where they can help to develop these technological advances. I just want people to understand that this thread moves across not only just the learner, but it goes through the teacher as well. Does that make sense? And I just see that there's so much power in really leveraging, and I understand when people are scared about academic integrity, and there's policies and procedures that can be put in place for that. But I also think that there's a fear, particularly with potentially those who are the teachers or those who are the fear that we don't know enough, and to be able to develop those groups to help to embolden them to utilize tools that can help our students, but also get our students to the point where they can be part of these engines as well. Because as Dr. Denley said, if we want 60% of our workforce to begin, 60% of the Louisiana workforce, 60% of our students to be in the workforce, then we have to make sure that the workforce that's there in 10 years, they have the skills and technological expertise to be part of this kind of ecosystem. So So for me, when I think of AI, I think of all the opportunities from a student success perspective, not just from the student, but also from the teacher and the teaching side of it as well. And there are critical opportunities, but we have to make sure that we understand where there are barriers, and we have to take accountability for ourselves as being the quote-unquote experts, but actually oftentimes, our students could potentially be experts as well, and helping us understand how they can use tools at 12 o'clock in the middle of the night that'll help them get to the goal, which is helping them to learn and improve on their writing or their mathematics, et cetera, and we have to be open to that. And I think that's a discussion in higher ed, but in K-12, that needs to happen early on and often with these two different stakeholder groups to help us really leverage AI and see what it can mean for us in the future.
Just want to pick up on that real quick, just two little observations. The first is, I really hope that the other disciplines handle the introduction of these tools better than mathematicians handle the calculator.
Yes.
Because I think too often as mathematicians, we say, no, check your calculator at the door. No, we don't want to, no. And we really didn't do a very good job of being able to bring in computational tools. Instead, we were very resistant. I think that was a mistake. I hope other disciplines do a better job. Along those same kind of lines, I want you to sort of turn the clock back just a few years for some of you and think when in word processing, when the spell checker arrived. And I think people said, well, people won't even be able to spell anymore. They won't. Well, the reality is people can spell, but more than that, the expectation for us today is that if you receive a document that has misspellings or incorrect grammar, what's the first thing that goes through your head? You say, well, that's kind of careless. I mean, didn't they see that it was underlined in red in Word? So our cultural expectation has now moved to a place where it is expected that someone would have utilized that technology before it came to you. And I think it's not going to be a few years until exactly the same kind of thing is going to be an expectation when it comes to the kinds of capabilities that generative AI can bring to all kinds of aspects of our lives.
I want to add one thing. Me as a professor and dealing with students, I think we have to be careful. Like there are so many missed learning opportunities that are happening because of generative AI. Like the student, if they don't think about a problem, but they give me the solution, you have to understand he doesn't know what happened. He did not learn. And this is something that is very dangerous. The second thing that, and someone told me that, and actually it's a fact, generative AI cannot say, I don't know, right? So he's like, he will always give you an answer, even if the answer is wrong. So me, when I deal with higher education, the science that I teach and the topics that I teach, generative AI does not know. And unfortunately, the program would give you an answer every single time, and the answer every single time would be wrong. So we have to be careful that if we are dealing with a spelling tool, is different than when we are dealing with computers that can give you answers, and 50% of the answers are wrong. Like 2 years ago, actually, my son pointed me something, is that if you ask ChatGPT how many are in strawberries, he will tell you 5. And then you will tell him, or you will tell the program, are you sure? And the program will say, oh, I was wrong, it's 7. So he cannot say, I don't know. And that's the main issue. I was actually checking now, and the answer is correct. But this is just a simple example. We have to be careful that the technology is going to lead to many negative effects, especially in higher education. The students that I teach how to design a bridge, if the student give me an answer from ChatGPT and I miss that the answer was from generative AI, not from the student will not learn how to design a bridge. And that can be very dangerous. So we really have to be careful about how the technology is growing too fast and we don't have check and balance for the technology right now.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction to make, so thanks for bringing that up, Mostafa, because I think it underscores in many ways how this particular technology is different from the calculator, Tristan, which is if you're going to use a calculator, you have to know the algorithm for the input. You have to know what that means in order to use, otherwise you will get an error, won't you? Whereas this particular technology is very different. That's the generative aspect of it. But to your point, also, Mostafa, now it gets it right about strawberry, doesn't it? And it's improving so quickly and so rapidly, and that's something that we have to attend to as well, is that we're very quick to get stuck in the, oh, how funny was it 6 months ago? Whereas now it's improving very, very quickly at speeds that are unusual. So I want to bring that question to you, Erin. You know, in your role with tech and innovation at the Pelican Institute, and talk to us a little bit about, you know, how is this technology different as it is being introduced into the economy, into society, into education, all these different facets?
This is really interesting because think about what prompts the vast majority of bills that get considered in the legislature. Policymakers tend to do a lot of what I'll call risk-based policy making. You know, here's a problem, I must rush to do something about it. The problem or the challenge with this is there's no way to ever guard against and address every single risk or wrong answer that may occur. It's impossible. It's evolving too rapidly. It's too big. And so we engage in a lot of discussions with lawmakers, you know, and it's never welcome news for them to hear, well, sit tight and don't do anything. Lawmakers really don't like to hear that. They're like, you know, well, we have to respond. We have to do something. And so we have a lot of conversations about, well, if you feel the need to do something, one, you know, we believe, and I think there's plenty of evidence to support, that the market will address a number of these things. If policymakers do nothing, just the response is we've seen time and time again, these things do get ironed out over time. But we also have lawmakers who just feel like, you know, well, you know, other legislatures are passing bills, and it's like the cool thing to do right now is to have an AI bill, which is also not a great reason to introduce a bill, in my opinion. But we spend a lot of time saying, well, you know, what should the appropriate response be? What is the right way to think about policy making in this particular space? If you must do something, wouldn't it be better to maybe start with just an inventory of what do we have right now? Where are we using AI right now? Let's start with state government and state institutions. Where are we using AI right now across state agencies or in our public institutions of education? What are some of the questions that are coming up? What are some of the challenges that we're seeing? What are some of the risks or the problems? And then the next step might not be, well, let's pass a law to attempt to address all of those things and, you know, maybe not even do so effectively. But what can the market do? What is the market doing to address these things already? What are developers doing? And then where, and someone mentioned this earlier, where are there already laws and regulations on the books that address this behavior? Maybe we need to concentrate on the behavior, not on the medium. For example, cheating. You know, again, to repeat this, cheating has been around for a very long time. There are already regulations and policies on the books about cheating, about academic dishonesty. Does it really matter if the student cheated because they had a copy of the answers written down on a sheet of paper in their pocket and they get caught that way, or if they use AI? It's the behavior that's the problem. And if we attempt to regulate every way to do that, we'll never be done. So let's start with what do we already have in place. Let's do an inventory of what we're doing already. What do we need to monitor? And yes, at times we may need to put some safeguards around that. But let's start with also what laws and regulations do we have on the books, and then we can have, we think, a more productive productive conversation about where policymaking may be needed to fill in the gaps. And how can we do so in a way that acknowledges this is a rapidly evolving field. The minute we try to put something in writing, it could very well be obsolete the very next year. And then we find ourselves in a situation where then we have to constantly go back and amend something because we've made it problematic, or even worse, we've done something to really inhibit the growth and optimizing technology in this international race that we are a part of. We just heard Vice President Vance on an international stage talk about the importance for America, for the United States, to be a leader in this regard. Are we going to be able to do that if our approach right now is risk-based policy making? We're just on a quest to regulate the heck out of something before it's really even begun, and we've seen the full benefits that are possible from it.
Yeah, great. So on that note, I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience.
So we've talked a lot about how ChatGPT or generative AI it doesn't know what it doesn't know, and so it'll answer you. And that someone can put in a prompt and then turn in a solution and not really understand what they were looking at or really have learned anything. So have y'all thought about, or can you speak to, I'm gonna call it assessment. How do you know now that somebody has learned something? Do you want a bridge engineer who's never been able to prove that they know what they learned through ChatGPT? They turn everything in with responses from ChatGPT. What's gonna have to change with regards to assessing someone's knowledge on a subject that can prove they actually know what it didn't all come from a ChatGPT answer?
Let me try to pick that up a little bit. I just don't think that's a new problem. The reality is that for a very, very, very long time, perhaps forever, it has always been the case that if you wanted to, you could get somebody else to produce answers or do the test for you or write the essay or whatever it is. And so as instructors, we have always had to try to create assessments in ways that really do assess whether or not this particular individual really does have that skill or knowledge. Now, I think it's probably the case we need to be a little more careful today because perhaps this availability is a little bit more available than it ever has been, but it has always been the case that we've had, oral exams or exams that are in a particular proctored environment or all kinds of other ways that really do establish whether or not somebody does or doesn't have the skill or knowledge. It's not a new thing. We just have to recognize that there are new ways in which somebody might access that information in ways that they don't actually have that learning. I think what's more interesting in this space is, and I heard this in the previous panel, I just kind of want to raise it up. What's new about this technology is that it is not a thing that just provides a right answer. Now think about all these other technologies like the calculator, or actually like Word, or any of these things. You give it an input, you hit the enter key, and out spits the answer, and you go, look at that. There's the answer. This is not that. Instead, what I think is interesting about this technology is that it is an interaction. Right? You actually have an opportunity to have an iterative conversation with this technology. And that is very new. And just like all iterative conversations that we have all ever had in our lives, sometimes what you hear from the other person is wrong. And so
it's a good point. It's that this isn't just chat, though. The generative AI aspect is a lot more than chat.
yes.
We have time for one more question.
Thanks. I'm really enjoying the conversation so far. Obviously, I run a data and analytics and AI company here in town. What I find is that about 90% or more of the people approaching the gold rush, selling these capabilities, if you look at their backgrounds 2-3 years ago, they have no legitimate sort of experience in this space. What do you see happening from a policy perspective to protect consumers and businesses and organizations that are investing in capabilities that a layman or a non-skilled person can replicate or create sort of the snake oil kind of image of being able to deliver this?
Great question. We spend a lot of time talking about the role of government in a space that I guess the best comparison that I have is the work on occupational licensure. We believe and do a lot talking about the role of licensure is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of individuals. It's not to stifle competition, although sometimes that's what we see when the government may go too far with its regulatory power, or where you have individuals within that industry really protecting the growth and guarding against competition. That's where I think these difficult questions are going to come up. What is the proper role of government? What's the role of policymakers in this space to make sure that where there is a legitimate threat to through the public welfare, consumer protection, if you will, that may be a very appropriate space where regulatory oversight is needed. And I imagine there will be probably a lot more, as this continues to develop and grow. But we have to, again, always balance that with a need to not do so prematurely, to not go too far to where it stifles innovation, because we also, for as much as there are risks associated with new entrants and things coming from all over the place, there are also legitimate cases where people who do not have a background learn a lot, and we see this with young people right now. They are learning this stuff very quickly and are doing just some really cool things and contributing. That's what innovation is all about. We don't want to stifle that. We want to continue to encourage and nurture that. But at the same time, if it's being done in such a way where it's leading to things that could be harmful, that's where policymakers, where our government does have not only an opportunity but an obligation to step in and say, we're going to make sure that we safeguard the users.
Great. Thank you, Erin. Well, please join me in thanking our panel.